Welcome back to Under the Sink Light, episode 10. Today's pickled red onions. So I started off with 4 red onions in different sizes. I planned to make 2 pint jars, but I ended up with 3. So really I would say maybe 1 large-ish red onion per jar that you want to make. So I just cut them in half. Well, I cut the top off. You want to leave the root on because that'll make it much easier to slice them. And then of course peel off the outer paper, and usually that first outer layer of onion is pretty waxy and tough anyway, and usually gets kind of beat up at the grocery store, so we peel that off too. You can keep your scraps for stock or compost if you like. So we're just going to do that with all the onions. I hate those little hairs because they just are incessant. They get everywhere. But you just cut in half and peel all of them to start. I think that's easier to do all in one, and then move on to the next step entirely. And then you're just going to slice them as thin as you can. You definitely want to use a sharper knife than I did, or if you have a mandolin, that's even better. But really it's up to your preference. The thinner you slice them, the quicker and easier they're going to pickle. But if you slice them a little bit thicker, then they might take a little longer to fully get the effect of being pickled. So this is just our first half of our first onion. And then when I put them in the jar, I just kind of break them up. That way it's not as if the inner slices aren't going to be exposed to the pickling liquid and the spices, because you want to make sure that everyone in the jar kind of gets the treatment the same way. Okay, so that's the first half of the first onion, and I just kind of stuff them in there too, because obviously they're not stacked up very neatly. And then I did that for all the onions. It came out to 3 jars, and they're pretty full. So the ratio for the liquid is 2-to-1, 2 water to 1 vinegar. So this is 1 cup of water and half a cup of apple cider vinegar. This is more than enough for 1 jar, but not enough for all 3 jars. So you can make a bigger batch if you want, or just kind of do it in small increments like I did. If you have extra, you can either dump it, or honestly I dumped my extra in a pickle jar. And then just 1 tablespoon of sugar or honey, and I microwaved that for 3 minutes just until the sugar dissolved. And for my pickled onions, I'm doing cayenne, salt, dried oregano, and dried basil. This is totally variable. You can make it whatever you want to. I just kind of like the sweet and spicy combo. But for all of them, regardless, you should always do salt. So I'm doing 1 teaspoon of salt in all of the jars, and I'm going to be doing 1 teaspoon of every spice that I'm adding in also. With the exception of the cayenne, it's going to be a little bit under 1 teaspoon. But if it's a full teaspoon, that's okay too. So I'm just stirring up the pickling liquid just to get that sugar dissolved. Kind of like when you make Jell-O, you have to make sure that it's all dissolved before you add the cold water. We just want to make sure it's all dissolved before pouring it into our jars. And then continuing with the spices is the dried basil, 1 teaspoon in each. And honestly, you can do the spices on top, or if you want before you put the onions in, you can do the spices at the bottom. In hindsight, I probably would have preferred to put them in the bottom, but either way, you shake up the jar so they all distribute anyway. It's just a personal preference. So then the dried oregano is going to be 1 teaspoon in each jar. And then finally the cayenne pepper. I'm going to take the little shaker off of it so I don't make a mess everywhere. And then I'm just going to do a little bit under 1 teaspoon. If you don't like cayenne or you don't want it that spicy, a really good alternative with these spices is just to use some ground black pepper. or if you're going to be letting it sit for a while, you can even use peppercorns. And then all the spices are in, so we're going to add the liquid. And like I said, this was more than enough for one jar, but obviously not enough for all three. So I'm going to have a little bit of extra, but I'm going to make it the same way to continue the jars. So 1 cup of water to half a cup of apple cider vinegar and 1 tablespoon of sugar. And then once you fill up the jar, you want to make sure all the onions are submerged. I just put the lid on, give it a good shake, try and get those spices distributed. And voila, that is the first one. Just an important note, you can use other types of vinegar depending on what kind of flavor you're going for, but just keep that same ratio of 2 water to 1 vinegar. So with all of them done, I shake them up real good, I leave them on a hot pad because they're warm, and I let them sit out for about an hour before going to the fridge. I would recommend refrigerating them at least 2 hours before popping them open, but you can wait as long or as little as you like. This is right before going into the fridge, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching.